Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the NBS portion of the World Assembly Symposium. This show is going to be a roundtable discussion discussing various events throughout the symposium. Any audience questions, please feel free to post them in the NBS microphone list channel. I have with me today Robes.
Hello.
LD.
Hi.
Tinfect.
Hello.
And Kenmoria.
Hello.
Thank you guys for joining us here today.
I was here last time. I'm legally obligated to be here for all of them now.
Is that how this works?
That is how it works. Once you're in, you don't get out.
They rope you and want you
I
there
realized that
forever.
when I signed up.
All right, so we're going to begin with a very simple question. Titles of resolutions, do they have any impact on success?
Oh God, yeah. Have you seen preventing the
Yes,
execution of
absolutely.
people?
Absolutely. Without a doubt.
Definitely.
You name your fucking resolution that that fucking legalizes genocide, and you name it protecting fluffy puppies, and that's it. You're in.
Definitely. If you start it with prohibiting or banning or illegalizing, it's worse than saying allowing or promoting or encouraging. That being positive.
Protection is always a good word, too. You always use protection.
Yeah, that one's all.
Upholding.
Presuming
promoting.
is always good. You always want to presume a positive there.
Now, why is that? Is that because of the lemming effect, or just players are not well-versed in the World Assembly that they just pass anything?
I think it's mostly a little bit of both. I'm not sure if I would quite call that the lemming effect. It's not so much a follow the leader thing, but it does come down to a lot of inexperience and people not reading past the title.
I think that if you were to name your proposal something that people will find agreeable, then to like uneducated nations or nations who don't pay as much attention, they'll be more inclined to support it.
I think it also, if you something agreeable, people are going to be more positive about what they're reading or just not read so much anymore because it already looks like something what they agree with.
Yeah, they can read it in a positive light after they've already read that title.
All right, so let's talk about the first event, liberations and their usage. When liberations were first introduced, they were meant as a defensive mechanic. What do you think about the offensive liberations, and can they be misused?
I think yes, they can be misused, but as a concept, I think they're really encouraging. It's an innovative use of mechanic to create something unexpected and new.
It's fairly straightforward, but it's a very textbook example of emergent gameplay.
Yes.
They can definitely be misused. I don't think they have been yet just because we only really have the three right now, and we all agree that we don't like those regions and they're fascists or have hate speech or something.
I think that once you take something to a certain extent, it can obviously become like overused or not properly used. But in the case of this, we've only seen a small amount of offensive liberations ever used. So we haven't encountered that problem yet.
So what would be an example of a misuse?
Maybe, for example, a tit-for-tat liberation. Someone liberates the region, the region liberates them back. That'd be a misuse. So it's just a response to a gameplay threat.
With respect to our hosts, I think liberating the North Pacific would probably also be a misuse.
Especially on regions where it doesn't carry an actual effect. Like if you're liberating a GCR, then it doesn't have any practical effect of you passing it. If you do it mostly for the symbolic effect, I agree that symbolic effects can work, but that should be a very sparing kind of thing.
Oh, damn, and the North Pacific is a JCR. My joke doesn't work. Damn.
Wow.
I think of them, ideologically, so we should be trying to restrict them to just things where they're, the ideology is disagreeable to people in general existing. So it'd be a misuse to use it against regions that maybe have ideologies or what have you that are disagreeable, but they aren't a threat to people if in the large scale, we should
The Confederation of Corrupt Dictators.
Yeah, I don't know. But we shouldn't be liberating like a monarchy or something that just promotes monarchy. Monarchy is not inherently, well, maybe disagree. You can disagree on that, but monarchy isn't inherently like kill all the people who disagree with us sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you talked about symbolic liberations such as CCDs. Should there be a difference between those symbolic liberations and, say, an actual offensive liberation?
Well, with CCD, as LD was just talking about, there's obviously the element of like fascism, which is harmful, whereas like, monarchism, imperialism, etc., like it doesn't have to be inherently harmful, whereas fascism, we can all agree, is, absolute rubbish. So if you wanted to propose something for CCD, then I don't think it falls in the category of just symbolic, because Jocko Spohr could very well do something stupid to get himself deleted one day, and it would serve a purpose.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. So I don't think CCD as an example falls into the symbolic category.
Well, it's not wholly symbolic. There are implications mechanically.
Yeah, there's some symbolism, but the big one is we hope that Jocko Spohr is going to do something stupid and get deleted, and then we can raid the
Which is
region
actually
and
pretty
destroy the
plausible.
place.
So, say he does something stupid, he gets deleted, the world unites, we go liberate CCD. When should that liberation be repealed, and who should be the one repealing them?
When it's a Red Fleet puppet storage.
I have a personal preference for myself being the one to repeal it, since I passed it in the first place, but I suppose some others might have not liked that I'm putting my personal opinions on when it should be repealed above everybody else's, but
Yeah. Anyone can appeal it. Should be appealed once it's become nothing. It's just a single nation there chilling.
I feel like the simplistic answer to this is that you repeal it once it's outlived its use. But then, like, once the point at which it outlives its use is still pretty subjective. So is it when other forces are able to enter the region and there's no password and we're able to capture it due to it being founderless? Or is it after the region's already been, locked down, one nation? Like, how do you, I guess, justify it being no longer of use?
to my mind, on a practical level, it's going to be somewhere in between those, because you probably want the password to be able to lock it down. So at some point after it's been secured by our forces, speak generally, but before we try to clear it down to one, because just influence math just means that it's a lot easier if we can put a password on it sooner rather than later.
Right. So you could say, after Jocko Spohr's been removed and that everybody's going to deploy to the region in the effort to, successfully lock it down, at that point you can start repealing the liberation and take advantage of the password so that you can effectively lock it down.
Yeah, like that.
So, going back to symbolic liberations, anyone's outside of the CCD sphere, should those be repealed in the first place?
Well, I think yes. If it was about being fascist and then no longer fascist, or there is no region, it should be repealed. It's become obsolete.
Yeah, when symbolic, liberations, they should be done away with when the symbol is no longer useful. At the moment, it still has symbolic purpose of reminding them of what they're supposed to be doing about supposedly reforming. We don't know how well that's going, but it's a reminder that they should be.
If the intent of the liberation when it was passed was that, okay, this region is obviously objectionable or undesirable or something, and we need to be able to access it when and if something happens, then if at any point it reforms or it becomes better or it's no longer seen in that objectively bad light, then you can do away with the liberation, I think.
Obviously, reform, of course, is not something like, yes, they've kicked out the bad people and now we're just going to do it immediately. Like, there's got to be a few years there, at least, probably.
Yeah, not just a dispatch and some feel-good tags. Actually, continued efforts and real change.
Moreover, asks, does the liberation inherently vile regions give them more attention than they deserve if the liberations don't have an immediate and mechanical effect?
I don't really think so. In terms of attention, say if it were a fascist region that's being liberated for being a shithole, I don't really think them having any more attention than usual is a positive thing.
I've looked a little bit at some of the three ones we have on Kaiserreich, Nazi Europe, and CCD. All their graphs of how how many nations they have. Really, when the liberation passes, those graphs don't really look any different from the regular ups and downs in the graphs. Like, who cares, right? There's a slight jump, but it looked like all the other small jumps, and Nazi Europa's just been on a downward trend the entire time. And then CCD, they were actively recruiting a lot at the time, so you can't even see there's any change from the liberation because there's already a gigantic spike at the time.
You can probably make an argument for like name recognition. I guess how many people, read their name or like at least check out the regions page or like pay attention to them. But even then, it's like not all attention is good attention. So, I mean, if you were to write a proposal, liberate CCD, and then like the resolution explains all of the atrocities of the region or condemn CCD more so, it doesn't give them attention in a good way. It just points out to everyone exactly how objectively bad they are. I mean, that's if you bother to read the resolution.
If they're being liberated, they must be large enough and influential enough. They're already well known. It's a matter of saying to the nation's community, they are a bad region, avoid them. They're already out there promoting, recruiting.
Totally, and I think that if people read a resolution that says this region is fascist and has a bunch of fascists and they moved there, that's on them, not on a little bit of extra promotion. They'd end up somewhere like it anyways.
So that kind of negative attention would probably be a good thing for the game as a whole because it's going to attract those negative players that you particularly don't want in your region.
Actually, I think there's a good comparison I can make here. And I don't know if it'll be a perfect comparison, but this is what it is. So if let's say there is a certain degree of attention, it's still negative attention. It's somewhat similar to the civil defense siren because yes, you draw attention to the fact, oh, these guys are fascist. We don't want to interact with them. These guys are not desirable. We shouldn't engage with them. Yes, it gives them the attention of, oh, these people are fascist, but again, it's not good attention. So it still causes like awareness of it, and the more that you can have people be aware of the regions they're moving into, then I think it's pretty much on them.
Moreover asks, how should new players differentiate regions who are OOC-ly bad and those of which are IC-ly bad, but make a clear distinguishment?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just going to come down. You have to trust people who've been here a while, like you. If you're like if you're founding in TNP and you're looking around at all these other regions, you should be looking to the people already in charge of TNP. They probably have a good idea which regions are which kind of CCD versus psychotic dictatorships. Which one's good, which one's bad.
I think when it goes about identifying these independently, something to look at is, if possible, the RMB, because if it's a remotely active region, the RMB will most likely represent the actual political players who are there.
To make that distinction, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge that a distinction exists between in-character and out-of-character bad. Once you acknowledge that, it's kind of like reading a storybook in a way, because the in-character people, or the in-character bad in this case, is just like playing a villain in a story or playing a villain in a play or something. You're not actually bad as an out character. You're just playing that as part of the story. I guess, like, for example, you could make the comparison. Raiders are in character supposed to be the bad guys, like, oh, raiding regions, and then defenders play the role of in character good guys, but out of character is a separate realm. So once you make that distinction, it's easier to see, I think. And it is on people who are older, like LD said, to help people see that distinction and recognize it.
Yeah, I think linking to that, it's about hyperbole. The COCD tries to remain sort of grounded and therefore is more sort of realistic fascism, whereas mentally ill's region is clearly, obviously, 10,000 slaves killed a month. Extreme. It's clearly humorous rather than being just silly and vile.
Sierra Lyricalia makes a good point. And actually, like, out of character, shitty people will tend to double down and just everything's a joke, don't worry about it, stop talking, kind of. Whereas people who are generally just doing it in character will clarify when asked.
Like a dismissive attitude towards criticism.
Yeah.
Moving on to the second event, manipulating voting trends. What would happen if all WA votes were secret for the first 2 days?
I think that would slightly change the effect of stomps.
Yeah, I think that definitely changed the effect of stomps or stacks just because I mean, there's obviously going to be people who are just looking at how the vote's going and they're going to interpret maybe interpret the resolution in that way. If a lot of people agree or disagree, then they're more likely to probably think the same just because maybe they trust those people or something else.
So is it being hidden in the sense that you don't see what the vote count is, or is it hidden in the sense you can't see the delegate breakdown?
Let's say the vote count is hidden.
I think it would also seriously change, possibly eliminate mid-vote campaigns. Because if you're trying to draw out support and you don't know whether or not it's passing, then what are you going to do? What's the point?
So if the vote was hidden, would that make voting based off purely the title more prominent as they don't have the majority vote there?
I think it could do. In the absence of a clear vote for or against, a player who's just there to answer issues, occasionally click a for or against, might look at the title or the category and use that.
I don't think the voting off title would be any more common just because, if you're going to vote off the title to begin with, you're probably not going to suddenly do it more if you can't see the vote count. If you're either going to vote off the title to begin with, or you're going to read the full thing and, think about it a lot. I mean, obviously more of a continuum there, but still.
You're either going to read just the title and vote, or you're going to be in compliance.
You're either going to read the title or you're going to read the whole thing, and there's a little bit of a continuum there, but I don't think the people who are reading the whole thing are suddenly going to just read the title if they can't see the votes.
No.
Astrobolt asks, I am curious as to what the speaker's view on the power of the delegates versus individual nations, especially in the General Assembly.
I think that being able to flip delegates is an important part of just how the GA politics works. Outside of any pseudo-moral questions of one person, one nation, one vote kind of arguments, I think it's just good for the game.
I agree. Because delegates have more time and a larger broad assembly office in some cases to read resolutions. Generally, I think their votes are more informed and more based on quality.
I think that for delegate votes, it really does help to have, regions where the citizens themselves or the resident nations vote for how the delegate votes, like internally, tell the delegate how to vote. Because then, assuming that your delegate votes with the majority of your region mates, it still is sort of representative of that in a way. And then you, as your individual self, if it's an outcome you don't like, you can still vote the opposite way that you wanted to vote anyway. So I think it still does work.
We mentioned earlier the lemming effect. What is the lemming effect?
Well, I think that goes back to where we come up with stomps and what's a term? Stack. Because
Stacks,
the concept being that if you can get in a large number of votes early before most people have voted, people will look at the votes and judge the quality of the resolution based on how it's going early on. Thus, by putting the big delegates having their votes at the start of it, they can manipulate voting trends towards their side.
Yeah, I'd agree with how that works. I think there's some lemming effect. I don't think it's so over dominant as some people say it is, but there's definitely some of it there.
It definitely plays a role. And if you intend on manipulating that to get voter support, it definitely works to some extent, but it's not the defining factor in whether a resolution succeeds or fails. It plays a large role, but it's not all-encompassing dominant.
I feel like some of the lemming effect, like how it's conceived, might also be misconstruing, say, just how people trusting their delegates, how their delegates vote, or TNP will send out a telegram with their recommendation, and that's similar to that. That might be producing some of like the effect as it is, but it's separate in that it's based on they trust their ministry and they trust their delegate to make the right choices, and then they'll vote similarly because they trust them, rather than just seeing the vote count and being.
Krytox is asking about the pass rate if delegate votes weren't weighted. I do not want to think about that.
I have no idea, just because that'd be almost an entirely different game to try and pass something if you didn't have delegate votes. At least that you can predict large chunks of the votes before the vote.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably see more feel-good titles, feel-good preambles, maybe less technical proposals.
If everything was like direct democracy, going back to the one nation, one vote, yeah, it's an entirely different landscape for passing things.
A lot of standing legislation would not be there.
Yeah, and you'd also probably not see as like overwhelming support for things either. Like I don't imagine you'd get 90% passage on things or above, or even high 80%. Like it'd be a lot more divided,
Your regional ministry should probably be a lot more important or more influential, just because regions would lack their delegates to do their stacking or stomping and voter trust. They need to rely on getting their people to actually agree with them, sort of.
All right. Moreover, asks, do policies such as TWPs against all except repeals have any merit when taking the large amount of votes that their delegate has?
No. I think I think the hardline anti-World Assembly stance is childish.
Yeah. I think if you don't like the General Assembly, don't join it or don't role play it.
I do appreciate the policy in one respect. It makes it pretty easy to tell. It's by far the easiest region to tell how they're going to vote on that, so you can almost just ignore their position because you already know it just based on what you're writing. If it's a repeal, then you get their votes. If it's not, you don't.
That's true. They're very predictable.
For West Pacificans in the region, I feel like it's probably a waste of votes and opinions, because I guarantee all of them aren't anti-World Assembly. And having a delegate who, doesn't, I guess, represent that in a way is probably not, the most encouraging thing.
Yeah.
But, from what LD is saying, from an author standpoint, it's very predictable. So you always kind of can count on that in a way. It's one of the few things you can count on. So I guess it does sort of help if you're an author, help used lightly in this sense.
Yeah, maybe. But I personally think it's just annoying. You've written a very good proposal, very well written, no loopholes, and it gets stomped down because of a universal policy that doesn't really reflect the quality of the proposal.
So on that vein, do have various nations within the World Assembly who claim non-compliance. What are your thoughts of people joining the World Assembly as a function of the game, as opposed to as the organization RPing something that would be non-compliant with General Assembly mandates?
I think it depends. It depends on how you do it. There are some nations who turn up, go, I kill my citizens, commit torture, do genocide, then leave again. And that's just boring.
We call those orcs.
Yes, the orcs. And the orcs don't add anything. They aren't helpful or valued. It's annoying.
Though,
on the other hand,
to the extent that non-compliance can be to a degree acceptable, as I stated in the text panel earlier, my nation, the Imperium, Tinfect, is more or less not effectively compliant. It does involve a lot of consequences for the Imperium, not just in terms of what the World Assembly can do to it according to its own legislation, but just in terms of role-played consequences of its own policy.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. It means it actually provides more storytelling rather than just shutting down the entire branch of the game because of the orcs.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you're doing it right, it has more stories, more options, more interactions you can have with other players rather than everybody living in, the kind of I think our end goal is the hippie utopia. If everybody lives in that, then it's really not much interesting story to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Like you can't just act like and brush it off like, oh, non-compliance, okay, it just doesn't affect me. Like you can't just ignore. It's got to have some sort of ramification or repercussion if you don't, and then you can use a story to tell for that. But you can't just act like it doesn't phase you or doesn't have any sort of impact.
Yeah. The fall of magical compliance as an idea has been broadly useful in terms of how roleplay could play out, not necessarily how it does.
So before we get to Moreover's question, should non-compliance be condemnable by the Security Council?
I think it already is.
Yeah,
I think if you're doing pretty good at role playing it, yeah, then, I think Tinfect mentions that way back in the beginning. Kenny's, well, it's technically creative compliance there, but it's the same sort of thing of we're condemning you because you're not really in compliance with all this legislation, just in different manners. But you have to be good on how you're doing it. You can't. It's not condemnable if you're just one-lining it out of I'm ignoring all these resolutions and you can't stop me.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is how condemns work normally. It's for being bad in an interesting and creative manner.
So, moreover, wants to go back to our previous topic. How do IFVs, such as those put out by TSP, where they take specific opinions from those in the community, differ from IFVs such as TNPs that give a specific recommendation written by the World Assembly staff?
I'm going to say I broadly prefer the South Pacific's approach, though I would prefer that it included more of an educated opinion in most cases. But I think that getting a range of opinions in the recommendation is valuable.
I think it has, range of opinions is valuable, but it also has sort of a more common people appeal in it, I guess. I'm in the, staff for the, TNP, at least in theory, and you definitely get it down to where you're really fussing about grammar or the specific implications of what you're saying, whereas, the TSP's opinions, you're just quoting whatever, some people on the R&B who are, you're quoting your opinions. That's be a more useful opinion of what other people think rather than what the kind of faceless ministry thinks.
The way that TSP and TRR do it, it's more focused on both sides, the for or against, and here's why you might want to vote one way or another. With TNPs, it's more focused on this is the way we've decided to go, here's why. So I think TSP and TRR kind of help you make that decision for yourself more in a way, because then you can read the quoted materials and be like, okay, who do I believe more? But with TNPs, it's kind of like these are the reasons why you'd vote this specific way.
Obviously, I'm biased. I'm on Europe's World Assembly office making IFVs for Europe. I think that I prefer the approach of having an expert team working on that opinion. Because otherwise, if you head to the forum, you can see the for and against. It's already available, often publicly. Whereas analysis by a team of people is more of a service that wouldn't otherwise be available.
Tinfect, you were going to say something there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I'd cut out. That's fair. I was responding to Kenmoria.
So going back to non-compliance with World Assembly resolutions, Astrobolt asks, This was mentioned in the text chat, but what do people think of non-compliance pacts such as the pro-life non-compliance pact, and how should the General Assembly community respond to them?
We did cover this briefly in the text panel, but to reiterate it here, I think that they are, in theory, a good thing. Because, again, non-compliance roleplay is valid and interesting. If it's actually what's going on, which in the case of the pro-life non-compliance pact, it was not. It was just a political move. But in theory, I feel like the power block sort of tug of war, I suppose, between a dedicated non-compliant group working to get certain resolutions repealed and another group attempting to enforce compliance or otherwise just cause problems for that block would be valuable and interesting.
Yeah, I think the pro-life non-compliance pact, they were on the right track of good role play, interesting role play. They just didn't really get that full potential, and they could have gone the route of we're all going to trade with each other to prevent that sanctions things from kind of really taking effect, and here's how we're doing that and avoiding other member nations trying to stop us. But they didn't really do that. They just stopped at the we're all non-compliant together, so we'll avoid those sanction effects sort of thing.
Yeah. I would like to see more packs in the future that actually have an impact, actually involve threads in the roleplay boards and do stuff. What's the list of names?
Yeah, just don't downplay the effects of non-compliance. Or don't say that it just, we're non-compliant, and then everything's just rosy from there.
Yeah. Because such people, the people who are just dropping non-compliance because they dislike a particular resolution, they can't really be taken seriously in the GA.
Now let's talk about commendations and condemnation. Who is deserving to be recognized by the World Assembly?
Me, apparently.
More like, let me expand that question a little bit. What is necessary to show to the World Assembly in order to be commended or condemned? Where's the standard at?
Personally, my standard has always been, I suppose this is admittedly self-serving, but has always revolved primarily around interesting and well-handled RP.
I think, personally, the biggest possible for one on anything has to be firstly, are they a decent person out of character? Like, is this the kind of person we want to recognize as, yes, you can play like this person and we'll like you for it, sort of thing. Which is what why we repeal the commendations of people who've later found out to be like not so great as people like Solarity or way back when Unibot.
My own expectation with this has always been, if they're really deserving of recognition, and there's enough to substantiate recognizing them, commending or condemning, you should be able to, within your proposal, be able to articulate to someone and show them that they're deserving, even if an average reader doesn't know who they are. Like you should be able to sort of paint that picture and explain, this is why you should condemn them, or this is why you should commend them. The more you can substantiate that, the better.
It should have a positive impact on a part of the entire game. So the General Assembly or the cards game or GOT issues should help a lot of players enjoy nation states more because this person's contributions.
You said, the panel said, out of character factor should play a role. Like, what is this? Who is this person outside the game? What about contributions to the game that are made outside the game? Like, for example, Alfiji Grande's tutorial series has become one of the top-ranked nation states YouTube videos. Would that be something we could possibly recognize?
I think so. And
LD, I think you dropped again.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there, but I think that's definitely the kind of thing that could be recognized. I mean, and the distinction has to be that it's connected to nation states in some way. Like that's definitely it's a tutorial about nation states. That's definitely something we could commend for if it's so if we consider it suitably notable. Whereas someone who's very good at and say in the NPO they're very good at organizing one of the other NPO branches. That's not really a nation states thing. That's a vaguely related.
You broke up at the end there.
Okay, sorry. I'm just thinking, it has to a commendation or condemnation has to be whatever the behavior is. It has to be related to nation states. So if Fiji's tutorials are related to nation states. If Fiji's making tutorials for some other game, those aren't related, and we're not going to mention those.
Yes.
At what point does being rude become an issue in a commendation or a condemn?
I'd say it would be an issue if that would affect the people's experiences interacting with that player.
I think it depends on what kind of rudeness we're talking about. Like if they're rude as in the sense of they're just a horrible person to be around, then no, we're probably not going to be recognizing them. If they're rude in the sense of they're constantly one-upping you, outmaneuvering everybody else on the regional legislature, on the General Assembly or something, where they're constantly they're kind of maybe have a bit of mean-spirited to their our Radio Defender propaganda sort of thing, and that's fine because that's still like in character sort of thing.
On like an in character basis, condemnations aren't supposed to flatter you. I mean, unless you take them as flattery. Like they're supposed to highlight the negatives and make the case for why condemn. So if you keep it in that realm, and it's it can be a little bit propagandist, but if you still keep it mostly true to the actual reasons of why, then it's not really rude, Whereas like add a character ad hominems, like no, that would be rude.
Right. What about with things like the attempted CNC of Aurelia, who would rather be commendable if they had not attempted to self-commend?
I would argue that Aurelia isn't commendable. Otherwise, anyway. If we're using a standard of not being a deeply unpleasant person, Aurelia is definitely a deeply unpleasant person.
Yeah, that falls into, is the person helping the nation-state community in a positive way? And if they're self-commending and using puppets and breaking the rules, the answer is no.
And I think to bring it back, we were talking about non-compliance earlier. As far as I remember, Aurelia's non-compliances of the I'm just ignoring that this exists sort of non-compliance, not anything interesting. So they're self-commanding their non-compliance and kind of their personality, as Tinfect mentions. All of that kind of combines to someone who's not really helpful and in any commendable sense, and kind of removes the reasons for condemnable because they're not even doing it in an interesting manner, any of their non-compliance.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
Yeah, full agreement.
So how is the shift in the Security Council away from gameplay-focused things going to influence both the Security Council and the World Assembly as a whole in the long run?
I love this topic. No, to me, it's a good thing because, with the emergence of NS cards and the popularity is nation answer issuing is still issues answering rather. It's still popular, and was a recent contest for it and such, and role play, which still continues on. It just shows how other facets of the game can still be on par with gameplay or still be worth recognition. So the recent shift to cards CNCs or roleplay CNCs, it's an overwhelmingly positive thing because the players who dedicate their time and energy and effort to those facets of the game, it doesn't make them any less deserving just because they're not game players.
Certainly.
Yeah, totally agree there. The shift is great. I think it'll be interesting to watch how most of the votes are controlled by gameplay regions, at least in the larger delegates. So it'll be interesting to see how they have to respond to that, because they're suddenly in a situation where a lot of resolutions they don't have pre-knowledge of the person or the region in question like they would on any given gameplay one person.
And I also think it's good because it provides an opportunity, and it's not always an opportunity that's taken, but it is an opportunity for game players to branch out and work with people who are from different parts of the game, Like game players getting interested in cards, or cards players getting interested in gameplay, or cards players getting interested in roleplay, the list goes on. And it's healthy for the game because more people are getting involved in more areas, and it's healthy for the SC because there's a variety and not everything's a gameplay centric resolution. And more people who dedicate their time get recognized for it.
And speaking of variety, it's just nice to have more resolutions. So I prefer proposals when they're to vote on or to discuss, rather than infrequently like last year. There'd be you'd have periods. There's months without anything really, and now I was a little not paying attention so much during the summer, but it sure seems like we've had a lot more regularity in how often we're having things to look at, to vote on, and to discuss.
I think that's definitely true. There's much more going on lately.
All right, Jutomi asks, has it been done or is it possible to have a CNC for F7 gameplay?
What do people do in Forum 7?
Good question.
It's usually considered like often considered, I think, the spam kind of forum. It's not the one known for I'm trying to be polite, like deep discussions. Like I know a lot of their threads are like, above nation said this thing, so what do you respond to that sort of thing, or make a wish games, or more famous ones was a 5,000 monkey genocide, and every post has to have some new way of killing a monkey.
I was so sad when that one died.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's theoretically possible to have one for F7 gameplay, but the usual, like, I guess, quality in a sense of like a lot of it tends more towards one-liners, and so far as I know, and the fact that there's the auto prune that removes everything after a week of inactivity kind of means it's a little harder to find stuff that is CNCable and also still exists as to cite as something that they did.
It's going to be hard to get an F7 CNC. Possible, but very difficult.
If you were to strictly adhere to the does it make things positive experiences or make things negative experiences, you, in theory, could make an argument that the people who engage in the forum F7 games and the people who get joy from, different ways of killing the monkey, etc., you could say that, I guess, that's bettering other people's experience, but like LD said, with the deletion of threads and stuff, or the archiving, it's not easy to research, and also I'm not sure how you would work that into a proposal to justify it's making people's experience better. I think you could make a case for it in theory, but it's hard to do or hard to implement.
I don't think the rules would be so much of a problem, like Jacker's typing in the chat there. I mean, there'd be more difficulties than the average resolution, just because it's something we haven't really dealt with before to figure out how we're writing around Rule 4. But I think it'd be possible eventually. You might have to do some weird contortions. I mean, it'd be harder than you told me is mentioning Portal to the Multiverse, it'd be harder than doing that because that at least you have single stories, and it's a little easier to make something up. Maybe for Portal to the Multiverse, you might be saying their world quality literature, and then mention fake it that all their role playing there is video games or book series or something produced by famous people in their nation. You can't see my air quotes, I guess.
Yeah. Look at the cards and art artifacts as an example of being really creative. So I really enjoy seeing good SC proposals really creatively interpreted.
So moving on, repeals in the General Assembly tend to be much more focused on quality, and replacements are almost always present. Whereas in the Security Council, it's almost always based on how deserving the candidate is. Is this an important distinction to be made? Is one inherently better than the other?
I don't really think so. I think that the methods of determining the quality of a General Assembly resolution and a Security Council resolution very much need to be different.
I think it's a difference in. Continue.
I don't think you'd want to go to the better than less than. I just think that I think we can all agree we want the quality of writing to be good in the proposals that we're passing, whether it's in the GA or SC. But you can't really just say one's better than or one's less than or more important than the other. It's just sort of a byproduct of the different bodies in the WA.
Yeah, it's different games. They're different standards of success, different goals. You can't compare them.
Yeah, definitely different goals, different outlooks. The GA is a lot more policy focused, so it makes sense that you're looking at quality of resolution because quality often means how well is this actually going to be a resolution, and in SC it's a lot more on is this person, do we like this person enough, and are their achievements notable that we should recognize them, and it makes sense then that we're arguing about whether or not they are. I think there's definitely times when the inverse happens where there's been repeals and replaced, like the Macedon condemnation, where we're saying they're condemnable, it's a really sucky condemnation, so we're going to replace it. Or there's occasionally a GA thing where like we don't like this policy at all, even if you implemented it good, like say the death penalty one a couple of years back, where the only way it got around was legislating it out of existence by making it really hard instead of just banning it.
I'll note that the standing interpretation of that resolution doesn't really make it very hard.
Okay, sorry. It's been a while since I looked at it. Maybe I've read too much of Bears Armed, and they seem to think made it really hard. So
the opinion is broadly changed over time, I think.
Makes sense.
So how important is it to have a replacement ready at the time of repeal?
It depends on the draft and who's repealing it. There are certain people who have a very strong whose history in the General Assembly implies that they would not support a replacement unless they actually provide one. So it's mostly contextual.
I think it really thinks it just depends on what your goal is. Like if you're staying in the resolution or the repeal draft that this is a good concept, but we need to make it better, then you should probably have either a replacement, or it should be you should be someone who can be trusted to provide a replacement, or that there's someone else who can be trusted to provide a replacement. But if you're just repealing it because it's a bad policy sort of thing, then it makes sense that we're not going to have a replacement because that's not the point of the repeal.
If you agree with it, if you agree with it in principle, but like just the text of the resolution doesn't suffice the purpose you need it to, or the policy just isn't working out, but it's a good policy, just the way you've implemented it doesn't work, then obviously you're going to want a replacement because you still agree with the core principle of the policy. But if you just don't agree with the policy itself, then obviously a replacement isn't going to be as desirable as a repeal, just an outright repeal.
So why should a resolution be repealed? Are small inaccuracies enough, or does it need to be something more substantial?
From a GA perspective, if a resolution tries to protect, say, I don't know, labour rights and doesn't do so, it should be repealed. Or if it does so in an incorrect or overly simplistic manner.
I mean, yeah, on a GA, I think if the resolution's written in such a way that it doesn't cover something that it should cover, then it should be repealed if you can't just pass something else to cover that same sort of thing. I think, my experience is a little more SC, but if over there, minor mistakes, since it's just saying that we think this person is commendable, small mistakes don't really matter so much since it's more, it's more symbolic sort of. So, yeah.
Yeah.
In the GA, it probably leaves more room to repeal on the grounds of like things, just not being the way that they should. But if it's an SC resolution, which is what I have more experience with, if 99.8% of it is correct, I mean, you're not going to focus on the other. You're not going to repeal the entire thing for one small portion. That's like a minuscule detail. I think in the GA you might do that. In the SC you wouldn't really.
I think also the SC is more personal. It's recognizing a particular player who will always either deserve or not deserve to have been recognized. Whereas in the GA, it's not as though the topic matter cares it's being legislated on.
Yeah,
It's
like
worth
in the
noting that
SC.
resolutions have been repealed for utterly trivial problems in the GA.
In my opinion, that just provides more room for legislation for players to get involved and pass some proposals.
Sorry, I'm trying to understand Sierra's question here.
It's not so much a question as it is framing a question that we were already discussing briefly.
All right, let's talk about approval rating. Is delegate bumping or any other rating tactic okay under any circumstances in order to influence delegate approvals?
To clarify, this is the practice of rating a small, for example, a smaller region to shift its votes, right?
Yes.
Okay. This is something that we've been discussing for a long time in the GA. I haven't seen it deployed until recently. I'd honestly like to see more of it, tenuously. It was very interesting to see happen. I'm not sure if it's a good thing.
Personally, speaking as like in this case as a game player, I think it has to be restricted to the people who are using it for given things should be members of that community. Like if it's happening to GA resolutions, the people leading it should be GA people, fighting about a resolution. And
agreed.
And yeah, me as a gameplay person, I shouldn't just be using the Blackhawks as my personal military to get rid of all the the GA things I don't like. I should be if I'm using we should restrict ourselves as a rating organization to security council stuff that we don't like Two-Bagger led some bumping on the evil wolf repeal, and we've occasionally, I think we manufactured some approvals for Commend, COE way back when.
I mean, sure, why wouldn't it be acceptable? And
Well,
the viewpoint that I take to this is, again, being a game player like LD, it's good to have a different type of operation you can do, so it's not just tag raid, hold, tag raid. You can now be something different, a different, mechanism for people to engage with, and a different activity that you can do to achieve a desired result. I think that you really shouldn't obviously don't do it on every single thing, because then it no longer become something different. It would just become standard fare. But with the actual action itself, I don't have an issue with it, no.
If I go to the other side, speaking as a GAer, recently a proposal I co-authored was hit out of quorum, almost, by an unrelated SC debate. I don't like the collateral damage it causes references to completely other proposals, like GA for an SC thing or SC for a GA thing, that isn't the author's fault?
Personally, I'm not fond of the fact that when we're bumping off for some security round council or gameplay reason, it affects the General Assembly. I don't really. It's sort of that awkward place of I wish it didn't, but I'm not going to stop because it does. But I'm not going to go around doing that on purpose. And I guess if it wasn't in theory, I guess at some point it would be possible to try and separate it out of maybe a couple of the approvals in the GA that aren't on the SC one. Sorry, so I don't know what I'm saying. Never mind.
No, I think that's a good take on the issue. Yeah, it's better if it didn't. They can't really be helped because of how approvals and delegates work.
I don't really have the GA perspective on that, so I'll defer to you guys on that, but that does sound, it sounds about right for what I would think.
All right, well, that closes the structured part of the show. I'm going to open up the floor to our panelists to bring forth any World Assembly topic they wish to discuss.
Let's begin with why International Criminal Protocol is the finest piece of legislation ever passed. Moreover, said it right. It's because it's 500 even.
I didn't realize we were up that far. Missed a little bit this summer.
There are a lot of resolutions. I was going through them earlier today. So over 700 total things passed. It's quite impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, we have, at the moment, just General Assembly is 508 and the Security Council is another 321, so we're doing pretty good.
You need to get those numbers up, SC people. Those are rookie numbers.
Yeah, I agree. Reading the chat, Jutomi's asking about when it's good to add a co-author. Yeah, I think it has to be some kind of substantial content, or in the SC case, it might maybe going to be more of a research sort of front. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I think on the GA perspective, if someone really affects the proposal's direction or gives verbatim things to a clause or a preamble, that should be a co-authorship recognition.
Yeah, if their contributions if their lack of contributions would make your proposal decently worse off, then they're probably worthy of being a co-author.
I agree with that.
Yes.
I think that if like in the absence of your co-author, your resolution would be way worse or it just wouldn't be as good as it is, then it's good to give them, sort of the recognition for doing whatever they did. Whether it's helping you frame your clauses or, researching whatever that they can do to make your proposal better. If it turns out better and they're part of the reason why, then go ahead and recognize them.
If they want to be recognized, of course.
Yeah.
Just assisting with the resolution doesn't mean they want anything to do with it.
No.
Yeah. Co-authorship is more dependent on what they want. We can occasionally pass a C&C over the nominee's wishes, But co-author should definitely be something that they want or that they're okay with.
Yeah, because it's a nice thing to do. It's being nice to someone. They've contributed well. See, more of us asked a question about should we repeal resolutions to bring legislation up to par with current standards in the text chat?
That's a fair question, and I've seen several resolutions. I don't remember them offhand, but I've seen several that I would add, that I would put forward as candidates for exactly that.
Yeah,
I think
it's a big controversial one. Oops, sorry. Carry on.
Oh yeah, I think it just depends on what the the problem of not up to current standards of if it's the current standards of they're not well written in like a grammatical sense, then I don't know. If the not up to current standards is it's not really a well crafted resolution in terms of what it's covering or how it's enforcing those protections, then definitely it should be updated or changed.
Yeah. I think an example of this is GA #035, the Charter of Civil Rights, which is very poorly worded on a compelling practical exception. That song should be repealed because it's so old, no one does.
Cocker is a very difficult resolution to repeal.
Yeah, likewise with the NAPA, GA002, all those big ones are here forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jacker's raising the point of, of SC #1 about Mastodon. Yeah, we repealed it because it was, really because it wasn't even mentioning a lot of the stuff they actually did, or did it mention it really poorly. And I think there's a few others like that kind of out. Like, I think the big one is, it was the TRR delegate for so long. I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but their commendation is kind of, in my opinion, pretty poor. Yeah, not for Edistan, the one for like 10 years from like 2003. Reading in can be like, theirs is not the most. Theirs isn't really great in my opinion. Like, their commendation, it kind of vaguely mentions what they're being commended for, but it's really poorly worded. But it's maybe not going to go anywhere because the player's not around anymore, even if their nation is. So nobody really has incentive to do it.
There's a few questions in chat. One of them is, how does one get ideas for an SC or GA proposal?
Well, we have a thread for that.
Just telling me. Yes. The GA ideas thread. Quite a new one, actually. Last year it was created?
Yeah, it's something of a slow-going effort at just putting forward things that new players could do that older players have agreed to just kind of let sit for a while.
I think personally, how I get ideas, SC is maybe a little easier. You find a player that's notable, and can I find stuff to back up their notability that would make it good CNC? Yeah, kind of. I'm really poor at actually writing writing proposals. But when I'm thinking of ideas, maybe look at the news. What's an important international issue of the time, or maybe a national issue that maybe internationally should be something done about that hasn't already been done, and you could make a good proposal out of that sort.
Agreed. There's nothing wrong with pulling issues from the headlines.
GA seems to be more inspiration driven, like you said, where you can read news headlines, or you can read newspapers, whatever you need to do to gain the inspiration for policy that you could implement in GA. Whereas SC is more environmentally, sort of, because you look around you to look to notable players who you might notice, and then you can kind of make a case out of that if they are notable. So you kind of just look to your surroundings in SC, whereas GA is more, where can you pull inspiration from, or what problems can you solve?
GA comes from everywhere. You can get inspiration from the Got Issues game, the issues in nation states, real world laws, problems, the news, anything.
Yeah, I was reading, Jutomi saying it sounds a lot like GI, my description of how I get inspiration. And I was thinking about that when I was saying that.
Well, they're very linked. Lots of Got Issues players who've written resolutions, and GA players who've written issues. Very similar skill sets.
So Moro is asking about RP as format for a debate in the Security Council. I think it can be a format, and it was way back at the beginning of the council, but I don't think it really will be anytime soon, just because of for the longest time it's been dominated by gameplay, and gameplay is what role play there is. It's more about it's about personality and persona than having an ambassador who's writing these things. So it's not really it's a different form of RP, and it's not really one that's obviously role play, like in the same sense that GA role play, you can tell that there's role play happening.
Can RP emerge as a format? Yes, it can. Is it plausible that it will? No. And it's mostly for the same reasons that LD just cited. I concur with that. It's not going to happen, but it can.
Agreed. I don't really see much ground for it happening so long as the Security Council is focused primarily on the R&D metagame.
Yeah,
I don't even think it's that.
Though.
Yeah, I don't even think it's just the RD part. It's just that, most of the authors are in gameplay, and gameplay is not any role play there isn't the same kind of stuff that you can make good role play out of. We're arguing about weird, yeah.
Oh, Jutomi, the GA should absolutely have more roleplay.
Definitely.
Yes, definitely.
Always,
More
always,
roleplay.
always more.
I
It's what
don't
makes
like
it
seeing
interesting.
just putting a character in speech marks and calling it roleplay. It should be personalities, ambassadors, throwing shanks at windows, doing stuff.
Yeah,
We used to throw
yeah.
people out windows.
Yeah, happened to me my first read. It was enjoyable.
You know what's funny? I don't think I've ever been defenestrated.
Like
Role play is what makes the GA not just NSG with the added ability to force your opinions on everyone else by passing them into law.
Yeah.
Role play is what makes it interesting.
Exactly. I think non-debate RP threads in the GA would be a very good thing. There's one sanctioned one with the Stranger's Bar, but I think the mods have generally not appreciated it. I think it would have to be something that we would actively have to work towards introducing. Though it would be good.
I think the mods definitely like it when those sorts of things happen in the other subforms, like the multilateral trade talks or whatever. They probably want that to be happening in general economics and trade instead of GA, even though it's technically a GA thing.
I actually think it would be better to be in the GA subforum, just because the regulars aren't really going to want to head into the mess that is NSRP a lot of the time.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it should be. I just think that's where the mods are going to come down on that sort of thing.
That's fair.
Yeah, I've never been to Stranger's Barks. I didn't like it's very quick, rapid fire posts after a longer, as Moira says, the trade talks. That'd be a good thing to do. That longer style RP. More like
absolutely, that would be fascinating.
Nation states.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Something different from the Stranger's Bar maybe has occasionally, I think, wandered into parts where you're role playing a character, but it's just a character that you're playing with, and there's only so many things you can really do with that if nobody else is interested in the trade talks kind of thing. There's some interesting actual bigger diplomatic things you can play with that there.
Yeah. It shouldn't just be another Ram's Head Saloon. It should be a separate GA-focused thing based in laws, resolutions, that area. That's what the GA players like.
Yeah, GA players are known to be litigious.
Very litigious. Yeah. I think it's because of the lawyers. You have too many lawyers compared to the rest of every other profession.
A high ratio of lawyers to real humans.
How would you exclusively write legislation from an out of character? I don't think I quite understand Jutomi's question.
I
generally don't think we should write legislation from an out of character perspective. Just because it invites more general type debates, which we don't really want in the GA.
Yeah, I mean, in the SC, it's flat out banned by the rules if everything has to be in character in some sense, and we usually occasionally have problems with that because it's hard. Cards. It's hard to if you can't write cards, it's harder to write about it.
Yeah, the GA even more so. You can't even mention a date. The GA is really in character. Otherwise, it's just political debate forum, which we already have.
Exactly. I think it should be a big header. When you click on the GA, it says, "This is an IC forum. Please click to continue," so you don't just come in and say, "Actually, in America, we don't do this. Fuck you."
Yeah. Out of character, examples from America or other countries are only useful when there's really no other way to describe, say, whatever your problem is or whatever your solution is, without having to, at some point, making up examples from your own nation or what have you is really not much different from just adding an OOC blurb. Yeah, this works or has not been proven to work in the actual real world.
Agreed.
Yeah. You can use it for saying your code's broken, we're over the character limits, but other than that, there's no reason to not do roleplay in character.
And yes, Jutomia, writing things from a character's perspective is certainly possible, but it's important to remember that one of the points in the GA is that your character is representing a national perspective.
Yes.
Something I've enjoyed toying with in the GA is the conflict between the characters who are representing the Imperium and the politics of the Imperium itself. And I feel like more people could do that.
Yeah, and I think there's something
that. I think it's hard to pull off well.
It is.
Yeah, something I think would be interesting is if we had, someone who role playing an actual, more like dystopia, more flat out in their characters, whenever you actually trying to promote their various, things of more dystopian things, or trying to protect themselves from legislation against that. And I don't think we have that element as much as we could have.
I think I'm the only one doing that.
Yeah,
I've been
definitely
trying to do that and not really carrying it off very well. I find it hard to put it into the topics like derailing things.
That's fair.
You don't know, Kenmoria the country is a capitalist dystopia with everything privatized. Throwing it out there.
Better than Minarchistan's hit and runs.
Yes. My nation doesn't have banks. So why are you here?
It's like, oh, we don't have a government. We just have this appointed CEO dude. Fuck off.
Yeah.
It's not interesting to say, we don't have roads. Why is this applying to us? Well, then go somewhere else. If you're on
Why are you here?
debate, then don't post. So post that you're actually providing an interesting opinion to help the author with some interesting roleplay.
From Giottomi, how would a dystopian-esque nation even go about writing legislation? Well, read international criminal protocol.
I think it depends on what you can kind of play it on both ends. Like if they're kind of going about it in a stupid manner, then they're just overtly writing resolution designed to favor them or their ideologies. You could also do it they're doing it the smart way, so they write a resolution that kind of seems like a good idea, but part of their enforcement or their clauses benefits their ideology, sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Part of the big experiment with I suppose less pleasant RP in the GA is trying to deliberately manipulate things to put loopholes that service you in.
Yeah, definitely.
Like in most cases, you can assume that the Imperium, again, to use myself as an example because I'm an asshole, I guess, is not usually debating in good faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. It's more exciting almost than just writing a proposal from an unbiased observer, good law perspective, to have ulterior motives and complex political machinations. There's a question from moreover, does the recent convergence of GA and SC authors, and even Got to Hughes to some extent, represent a positive change or a negative one?
I think that's broadly positive. I've enjoyed having the SC people around and actually participating.
Yeah, I think more mingling of communities is definitely a good thing for just understanding each other, or just finding new and interesting things to do in this game.
Yeah, I agree. If nothing else, it's new authors, new people with new ideas, bringing other legislation topics or other commendations, condemnations. 2 questions. First question from Jacker. There's been talk for years of new SC categories. Yay or nay?
I think yay provisionally on certain categories. Like, as much as I'm loath to say that Unibot's given a good idea, I'd really like it at some point if we actually got his idea of having just a kind of a blank sheet sort of thing where we can write, hypothetical gameplay norms into an actual resolution sort of thing. That was what he proposed at one point. I'm not sure about some of the other categories because a lot of them seem to be like, here's how we can make a more effective liberation, or how we, screw over a region in interesting ways. But I liked the kind of blank sheet international law sort of thing for gameplay.
Personally, what I would like to see in the Security Council, and this might just be from a GA perspective and not really understanding how it works, but I would like to see something that has a bit of crossover with the GA.
For the
Very
idea,
interesting, yeah.
For the idea itself of putting more categories in, yay, I think. It just really depends on what those categories are.
I think in particular, it shouldn't favour defenders or invaders.
Right.
It should be either used for both or useful for neither.
I hope these long silences are getting edited out.
I really hope they are. To fill the silence, a question from Dredton: should mechanical or technical changes be put in place to limit approval bumping?
No, not really. Again, I'm tenuously supportive of doing that more, actually.
I don't think so either.
Obviously, I submitted a proposal in technical forum to limit it, but having seen the responses, I've changed my mind. It also, for a start, really can't be done. It's hard to start whilst preserving how things already work, and it restricts an avenue of gameplay that could be explored further.
Exactly.
I think it's just there's not even the proposal in technical at the moment is about making approvals limited specifically to the delegates so they don't lose it if they get run out of office. But I think that kind of, in theory, eliminates a different method of you can get rid of your delegate if you don't like what they're approving, inside the region. I don't think that happens too much, but it's, that kind of thing is, it's one of those unforeseen side effects of you're getting rid of some other potential, regional experience in order to get rid of this one you don't like so much. Not sure though.
Putting in place mechanical or technical changes and limiting that would probably unnecessarily constrict gameplay. We haven't seen it done to a grand extent yet, but again, it's an avenue to be explored, and I don't think you should limit that.
Yeah. I think if it got to a point where it became happening on almost every proposal, I would say yes, allow the J and S to have some freedom aside from gameplay. But at present, there's no real issue.
I suppose, yeah, I'm kind of thinking along that line at the moment. It's an side effects on the GA are an unfortunate side effect in a sense, but it's not. It's thankfully it's not something we're running on every SC proposal, so it's more of you're unlucky enough to have submitted something at this time than something where you just can't do anything about it because gameplay is constantly trying to screw each other over and screwing everybody else in the process.
Yeah, I think apart from liberation, you can always submit again. There's no time limit. And
Jutomi's asking if it's hypothetically condemnable, and I think maybe if you're someone who's if we brought some Gatesville sort of thing that's doing everything in GA, then that's maybe condemnable. And if but otherwise it's going to be something it's a flavor sort of thing because otherwise it doesn't happen often enough. Something you can build a condemnation around, but you can mention it in sort of this person did this thing, and here's how they're screwing the Security Council because they want to or something.
Yeah,
I think it would be very interesting to see someone use it as part of a commendation.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, like they've vented paupers going to vote through excellent application of voting. I mean, a good thing to include.
Yeah. Moreover's question: how disastrous or marvelous would a World Assembly reset similar to April 2008 be?
Ooh.
And
I think it.
I feel like that would be really bad. Mostly because a lot of major resolutions would just be immediately resubmitted, and the queue would be full for like a month.
Yeah, there'd be several months you're just doing the same thing again, maybe with minor wording tweaks.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not in favour of seeing a queue of 28 pages lining up and Telegram's banned for every single one.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I might have cut out there, but like Security Council, like a lot of people with condemnations or commendations, we can't replace them because their nations no longer exist. Or like in Miles' case, he can't make another nation because he got, he's deleted on site for unrelated reasons in a sense. Or, we have liberations on, vulnerable regions that we couldn't get back right away. And, I could go out and destroy someplace because there's too much stuff in the queue to make me not do that. Yeah, two baggers.
The chaos would be briefly entertaining, but only briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also it would become very inaccessible. If there are no new topics, they're all being queued up, there'd be nothing else to write about. To have the opposite effect of the intended one.
Yeah, there might be something discouraging about actually seeing, like, we get a 4 months straight of a full queue, and discouraging to new players to not make it seem like there's always something up, and you're never going to have a shot at it yourself.
Yeah.
Don't know if that happened, but and moreover, it's asking if we should be able to CNC CTA nations. I don't think so, because oftentimes, we'd end up probably doing condemnations against nations who'd really not like that, or just because we don't like them, and they wouldn't have any really capability to defend themselves in the same way that an existing nation can. Because usually, even on condemnations, we still care a little bit about their opinion, at least in the sense of we're thinking them as badges in some sense, and we'd miss out on having, it'd be a way to end up with the ability to just say, yeah, we don't like you person who hasn't been here for 4 years.
Yeah. And I think the more important question is, do we really want to ask the coders to do that?
Yeah. The site's been made on matchsticks.
Yeah.
Relating to site being made of matchsticks, in a hypothetical sense, if we could see amendments being coded possibly, would we support that?
No. That would be absolute chaos, and I do not want to manage it.
I don't even know how to imagine how you manage authorship when you can amend something again, or and I think it's just better that you either have to repeal it to get what to fix it, or you have to pass something new. Like, for maybe an example, we've realized at some point that the genocide resolution doesn't cover basically class or economic sort of things that isn't inborn, but you can still go out and kill all the people for. So Wally came along and passed something to fix that problem. I don't think that has the same sort of oomph as if you could just amend the genocide resolution to include that.
More importantly, I would be worried about amendments being difficult to read or difficult to immediately understand for voters who tend not to read or fully comprehend the resolution that they're voting on.
That makes sense too.
For example, if you amended a NAPA and then had it strike and then had the amendment strike the clause which says member states can own nukes, then what is the difference between that and a repeal, except that you are packaging it in a more palatable form?
Yeah. And something controversial, like, say, 286 reproductive freedoms, that could be 4 against, strike through, should just be illegible.
Exactly.
All right. Well, with that, the World Assembly Symposium of 2020 is closed. I would like to thank the North Pacific for hosting the event and our panelists for joining our show. Also, a big thanks to everyone who participated, no matter how big or small. And we look forward to seeing you again next year.